I think it's very important to understand how fundamental the shift has been in a positive way in these 50 years. Back in 1975, China had not yet started its reform and opening up process. It was a closed-door nation with very little connections to the outside world, while the European Union was 9 nations and nearly all of them in northwest of Europe, a relatively small entity. In these 50 years, there's been an enormous, explosive expansion of context, millions of tourists going between the two continents, academic context, political context, economic integration, enormous trade. It's been a huge expansion of connections in all dimensions, and all this is very, very positive for the world, and for Europe, for China, and for the world. There are so many areas of cooperation, but let me point to 2. One is political. The world needs green environmental leadership. Europe and China are the best placed entities to provide that. The United States of America is abandoning its leadership at the moment. And yes, India, Africa, Latin America, they will also join, but Europe and China is very well placed to lead the world in a green direction. 10 years ago, Europe was still far ahead of China when it comes to the environment. Now the roles are reversed. China is well ahead of Europe, both when it comes to tree planting and protection of nature, as well as, of course, when it comes to the green technologies. China is now the #1 nation on every green technology. 60% of solar, wind, hydropower, electric cars, batteries, whatever you can mention, are made in one nation alone, and that is China. So business cooperation between China and Europe will be very essential. Further integration of the markets will help green development. China need to make sure that European companies can succeed in the Chinese market, and Europe need to open its markets for Chinese products. Europe should invite Chinese solar companies, Chinese battery factories, Chinese electric car manufacturers to invest in Europe. Then we in Europe will get access to the best technology which is available at the moment. Look, this is exactly what China did 10, 20 years ago when they invited Volkswagen or Siemens or BMW or Renault to invest in China to learn from our technologies. Well, now China is ahead of Europe, and it's time for Europe to learn from Chinese technologies, and the best way to do that is to invite investments from Chinese green companies in Europe. Jointly, Europe and China need to lead, of course, cooperating with all the other great nations in the global south, like Brazil or South Africa or India or Indonesia. So what will that leadership imply? I think 2 main things. We need a rules-based global order. We'll go into a multipolar world where, United States, China, India, Europe, Russia, Indonesia, there will be many powers, and we need basic rules for that future. Those rules cannot be biased towards the West as they were in the past. There may be fair rules for everyone, like we respect the sovereignty of all nations, meaning we respect the sovereignty of Ukraine, but we also respect the sovereignty of Palestine. And non-interference in the internal affairs of other nations. I mean, China is not interfering in the internal affairs of other nations, but nor should any other nation interfere in other nations' internal affairs, and global cooperation based on dialogue and respect. We desperately need a rules-based order to maneuver the multipolar world, and Europe and China should make that happen. Then the other is we should not go into a future of tariffs that will make us all poorer. An open global trade has made nearly all humans much more affluent and much better off, much better educated and much better health than at any other point in human history, and we should continue on that track. Europe should avoid putting tariffs on, for instance, Chinese electric cars. To the contrary, it should open its markets for Chinese products so that we can share the best of Chinese technologies. But of course, vice versa, China should make sure its markets are open for European products. China did something very, very important recently, and that was to open the Chinese market for all African products from all African nations. Europe and others should do similar steps to make sure that we get a global trade which is beneficial for everyone. Well, that will make everyone more affluent. By putting tariffs in no coordinated fashion, just by impulses by certain presidents, well, that will for sure make us all poorer.